my background in this. To give you just a moment, a little bit of my background in this field. I appeared on a quiz program in the United States called Jeopardy back in 2004. And this is a very popular quiz show that's been running for decades. And you get to come back if they play one game per episode, and you get to come back if you win. So I was on 6 episodes of it. I appeared in 4 in the regular season. And then I appeared in 2 in the season-ending Tournament of Champions. And here's a photo of me with the host of Jeopardy, Alex Trebek, on the Tournament of Champions set. Unfortunately, he passed away almost exactly a year ago, but he was a very popular and beloved figure in pop culture. Anyway, after doing that, I did nothing really in the world of trivia until a couple of years ago, when some friends of mine, a couple of whom I think are here now, got me involved in the Tokyo pub quiz scene. And I found that so enjoyable that I eventually ended up writing questions for pub quizzes. And so what I've learned in the process of trying to write questions that go over well with a pub crowd is the basis of the advice I'm going to give you today. An event like Jeopardy, and let me take this down again. A quiz show like Jeopardy is an individual contest. It's every player for themselves, but a pub quiz operates differently. It's more of a social event. People play in teams, and there's usually on each team, there's 4 or 5 people gathered around the table, and they're trying to fill out their answer sheets for each 10 round of questions before handing them in to get scored. But whatever kind of quiz it is, though, you need good, well-written questions for the event to succeed. And a successful quiz event, it should be fun and interesting, first of all. It should be challenging but doable. Doable is important. And also, it doesn't have to proceed at lightning speed the way a television show might. But it does have to keep up some momentum. You don't want it to flag and have a lot of time when there's nothing going on. Challenging but doable is important because you don't want to stump everybody. If you're asking questions no one can answer, they're bad questions. So an impossible quiz is a bad quiz. You want most people to get most of the answers. That way they're going to feel good about it, and they'll have a good time, and they'll come back next time you host a quiz. And as for the momentum, the ways you want to avoid losing momentum is with overly complex questions that have to be repeated and clarified, or with questions that lend themselves to more than one answer, which leads to debate over what answers are acceptable and who gets a point and who doesn't. So with all of that said, let me show you a brief preview of something that will come up later in today's presentation. We're going to do a little exercise in which I will ask you to write some trivia questions. The subject will be Olympic host cities. And we're going to start with this material that I hope you can see on your screen now. And if you think that's a very interesting list, good for you. If you think it's a boring list of names and dates, that's even better, because I'm going to try to show you how to jazz it up and make those dry facts into fun questions. Now, to jump into I'm going to give you 10 tips, which will appear on the screen at the end, but if you'd like to jot them down as we go along, that might be a good idea. Tip number 1, build your questions around the words who and what. You probably learned in school that questions are made with words like who, what, when, where, why, and how. But if you're writing quiz questions, most of those words are absolutely useless. You should stick with who and what, and I will show you why that is. For example, here's a question. Who is the Prime Minister of Japan? And if someone wants to raise their hand and answer that, please do. And no hands going up, at least not that I can see. David Gilby.
John Gribble.
Okay, that wasn't the answer I was expecting, and so I cannot give you a point. I was looking for Fumio Kishida. Fumio Kishida is the preferred answer to that question. Oh, and by the way, in cases of dispute, it should always be stated at the outset, the quizmaster is always right. Just say that. That's one way to avoid arguments. So that's a who question. A what would be, what is the capital of Tochigi Prefecture?
Utsunomiya.
Yes. Yes, I think that was James's voice, Utsunomiya. But here's the thing about those answers. Utsunomiya is one word. Fumio Kishida is 2 words. Even if you use this title, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, that's just 4 words. These questions can be answered in a single word or a short phrase, and there's only one single word or short phrase that fits each question. The answers are beyond dispute. Now compare that to who or why, with why or how questions. Don't try to answer these, but why did the Soviet Union collapse? Or how is cheese made? I mean, those are interesting questions and important, but people have written entire books to answer them. They don't lend themselves to a quiz. Even a genius giving the most concise answer would need at least a complete sentence to address one of those topics. And if you've got 20 people taking your quiz, you're going to get 20 different complete sentences, and then you've got to listen to and evaluate each of them and judge which is acceptable. And it's a big waste of time, and you'll lose all your momentum. That leaves us. I see a hand up. Yes, David.
What about the where and when? Are they also simple?
As I was just about to say, where and when are deceptive because they sound straightforward, but they really aren't. They are elastic categories that expand like accordions. For example, you could ask, when did Edgar Allan Poe write The Raven? Or you could ask, where does Boris Johnson live? You know, when could be, are you talking about the date, the year, the century, the historical era, Once Upon a Midnight Dreary? When did he do it? It could be any time. Similarly,
when it was like writing it and publishing it, then 2 are also separate.
That is also true. I was going to get to that, and I was going to actually hold that thought. Hold that thought. Let me just throw you out a where. Where does Boris Johnson live? You know, you might be going for a certain address on Downing Street, and if someone gives you that answer, you'd give them credit for it, but somebody else might say London, that's correct, or England, that's correct, Europe, that's correct. Although he's made it less so, it's still various answers could be true. Those are very, where and when are very expandable questions. So convert them into what. Say, in what decade did Edgar Allan Poe publish The Raven? Now there's just one answer. It's the 1840s. And this gets back to what Kirsten said a moment ago too. It's better to ask when something was published than when it was written, because publication dates are easier to pin down. As for the Boris Johnson thing, that leads into question number 2. I mean, point number 2. Point number 2 is look up every fact, especially the ones you think you already know. I mean, when it occurred to me to use Boris Johnson as where he lives as an example of where question, I assumed the answer was number 10 Downing Street, because I've always known that number 10 Downing Street is where the British prime ministers live. But I wanted to confirm it. So I checked around on the internet and I found a number of news stories that say that Boris Johnson and his 3 or 4 most recent predecessors have all lived at number 11 Downing Street. Apparently, it's just a bigger and more comfortable living space. And so they've all moved one door next door. And actually, his address is number 11. So look up every fact, even the ones that seem clearly obvious. Point number 3, make sure your facts are facts. I came across the funny little anecdote. There's a lot of them in this book, A Matter of Facts by a guy named Marcus Berkman, who is a British pub quiz national champion, who described the origins of the British edition of the Trivial Pursuit board game. Apparently, it was written in a great hurry to cash in on the success of the original Canadian edition. And because it was written so hurriedly, it has a lot of bad questions in it. And one of the examples he gives is, what is London's most famous bookshop? To which the author comments, you would probably say Foyle's, but if you had said Dillon's, who was to say that you were wrong? And speaking for myself, as someone who has been to London only as an American tourist, I would have said Waterstones. And people might think I'm uncultured for giving that answer, but it does show that it's a famous bookshop. So that's a worthless question because there's no definitive answer to it. It's like asking what is the best of something. That's just a matter of opinion. But there are cases where you might think it's easy to avoid matters of opinion, but there are cases where you can get tripped up. For example, after a lot of glare on that. After Alex Trebek passed away, People magazine published this special commemorative edition all about him. And one of its features was a timeline of memorable moments in Jeopardy history. And I'm going to show you an item from that timeline. It should be coming up on your screen now. There was a game in which everyone ended with $0 back in 1984. So it says, after a series of regrettable bids for the final Jeopardy round and 3 answers that failed to identify the calendar date with which the 20th century began, all 3 contestants finished the game with no money. Now, this seems kind of strange, doesn't it? That 3 people who were smart enough to get on a nationally broadcast quiz show couldn't answer something as seemingly straightforward as the calendar date with which the 20th century began. And People magazine, trying to put a nice face on things, doesn't say what the correct answer was or what the incorrect answers were, but I have a strong suspicion that I know what happened. At the beginning of the 21st century, I recall people getting into endless arguments in bars over whether the century had begun in 2000 or 2001. And I guess you could make the same argument about 1900 versus 1901. But it really, first of all, it doesn't matter. And secondly, there's no way to solve that question. It's like debating whether a tomato is a fruit or a vegetable. Don't ask about things that are fun to argue about. Have fun arguing about them, but don't make them into pub quiz questions. Another way you can run onto the rocks here without seeming to realize it is matters of definition. For example, if you ask what is the tallest building in the world or in a particular city, that might seem straightforward, but people will dispute how your terms are defined. They will ask you, does the height of the building include the antenna on top of it? Or, does a communications tower count as a building if there are no people inside of it? So one way around this brings us to point number 4. Point number 4, as a way of avoiding disputes, state your sources to pin your answers. I have learned that the writers for television quiz shows such as Jeopardy and also Who Wants to Be a Millionaire have a term, pinning, they use to describe getting a question so perfectly crafted that it has only one answer that fits. They don't want alternative answers to come in and catch them by surprise. They want to pin the question down to a particular answer. And one way to do that is to state your source. I will show you in a moment an example, recent example from Jeopardy, from an episode that was guest hosted by LeVar Burton. He had a category of the richest person in each US state. Richest person, each state, sounds straightforward, but how rich someone is a debatable thing. Some people exaggerate their wealth, some people hide their wealth, even people who are straightforward and open about it, the numbers are always changing. Also, the richest person in each state is probably a billionaire, which means they probably have additional houses in other states. So what state do you connect them to? So here's how LeVar Burton handled that in introducing the topic. Oops, wait a minute. Sorry, I have to go back and restart that. I didn't have the sound connected. Okay, and please listen carefully. The sound may be a little bit faint. Richest person in each state.
First to select, but first, here are your categories. A Nobel laureate wrote that. Old military abbreviations, then it's all in your head and hands, followed by the state's richest person, according to the Forbes list, then playing the part, and Take a few letters.
Okay, I hope you were able to hear that, but he said the state's richest person according to the Forbes list. Those were crucial words he had to include because Forbes magazine, it's a business magazine in the United States that periodically comes out with lists of the richest people. And it's considered a fairly authoritative source, but most importantly, it's a known source. So he's not really asking who is the richest person in each state in these questions. Because that's debatable. There could be multiple answers. Instead, he's asking who does Forbes magazine say is the richest person in each state? That narrows it down to just one possible answer. So if you anticipate any grounds for dispute, put the source right in your question. Begin it by saying, according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, or according to the King James Bible, or according to Nuclear Engineering for Dummies, or whatever your source is, stick it right in the question. And then the question actually becomes about the source rather than the topic, and it nails it down to just one answer. Point number 5, obscure facts, and this is a fun one, I think. Obscure facts can be turned into easy questions. This is something Jeopardy does quite often, but I'm going to start out with an example that I have written about Nabia Yusuf. So how many people here, don't say it, just how many people here know who Nabia Yusuf is or was? Okay, lots of puzzled looks and shaking heads, which is just what I wanted. Nobody knows anything about Nabia Yusuf. Her identity is the ultimate obscure fact. But I'm going to ask a question about her that I think a lot of you are going to get right. Here it comes. Nabia Yusuf is the last person to appear on an alphabetical list of survivors of what 1912 maritime disaster? Okay, now anyone know what it is? James Crocker, you're nodding your head, I think. Do you want
Would
to
that be
answer
the
it?
sinking of the Titanic, Tom?
That could be exactly what it is. Yeah, the sinking of the Titanic. So this is how you take it. Now, if I had just asked who is Nabia Yusuf, or who is the last person alphabetically to survive the Titanic, I mean, that would have just been cruelly obscure. No one would have gotten it, and it would have made me look like a jerk, and it would have killed the momentum of the game. But you can turn such a bizarrely obscure fact into an easy question by putting the obscure part right in the question and making the context of that fact the answer. Usually, obscure facts, if they're interesting at all, are interesting because they're part of a well-known context. So make the obscure part the question and the context the answer. I'll show you 2 examples of how Jeopardy has done that using pages from my Jeopardy question a day desk calendar. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with that show, I should tell you, they have a slightly idiosyncratic way of writing their questions. Where a normal person would use a word like what, they tend to use a word like this. So when I read it out loud, I'm going to just change this to what. And here we go. Hang on. Okay, in the category of art books, the question is this. The diary of young Julie Manet has been published as growing up with what group of painters? Anyone want to take a shot at that? The diary of young Julie Manet.
The Impressionists?
That is correct. And have you read Growing Up with the Impressionists?
Absolutely not.
Have you even heard of Julie Manet?
No, but I've heard of Edouard Manet.
Exactly. So people, I don't think the writers of Jeopardy expect people to know who Julie Manet is. I think they expect them to recognize the name Manet and then make the mental leaps necessary to get to Impressionists, as you just did. So thank you very much for that. Here's one more example, a similar pattern. The category is at the zoo. So what capital's zoo was created from the personal animal collection of King William IV of Prussia?
Moscow.
No, reasonable guess. Tracy?
Berlin.
Okay,
Maybe.
all
Berlin.
right. Yes, it is Berlin. And did you know that King William IV had a personal animal collection?
No, but
And
Prussia. Yeah.
exactly. So how did you get it?
From Prussia, poison.
Yeah, exactly. So that's how they took the obscure fact of William IV and connected it to the more familiar context of Prussia being a predecessor of Germany, where the capital is Berlin. So that's a way you can take an obscure fact and make it into an easy question. Another thing that Jeopardy often does, which I like, and which I'm going to ask you all to do in a few minutes, is to write questions that include more than one route to the answer. For example, I'll just show you, I'll jump straight to the calendar page, show you how they did that. Here we go. Many moons is the category. With at least 50 other moons for company, Callisto isn't lonely, orbiting this planet, or orbiting what planet?
Jupiter.
Jupiter.
Yeah, correct.
Saturn.
Oh, it was Jupiter. Well, two out of three just got it right. It was Jupiter. And there are two ways to find your way to the, two routes to the answer there. One is you just might know that Callisto is a moon of Jupiter. When I first read that question, I did not know that. However, I knew that Jupiter has a lot of moons, and when it talks about 50 moons, we must be talking about one of the really big planets, and Jupiter's the biggest. It's probably got the most moons. So even if you've never heard of Callisto, you can still answer that question by going through the other route of guessing from 50 planets. Next, here's an example of a similar pattern of question that I've written that touches on both Japanese and US history. So category of Japanese history since 1800. According, oh, just a moment. Am I showing it? Am I displaying it correctly?
No,
Nope.
Okay, can you see it now?
Hold on.
now it's loading.
Yeah.
Okay. According to her autobiography, U.S. Senator Mazie Hirono suspects that her mother named her after what Japanese emperor, with whom she shares a November 3rd birthday?
Hirohito.
Showa Tenno.
Nope,
Hirohito.
not quite. Let me read it again. This is probably the toughest question I'm going to ask today.
Meiji.
Ping pong, who said that?
Kirsten.
Oh, okay. And how did you get it? Oh, you knew it, didn't you? You read that somewhere. I
Yeah.
think you told me. I test drove this question on a few people before, but I was a little trepidatious about including this question because it is a bit difficult, but I was hoping, I seriously doubted that anyone read Mazie Hirono's autobiography. I've recently begun reading it, and that's something she talks about at the beginning. But you might know, an alternate route to the question is you might know that November 3rd is a national holiday in Japan. It's currently called Culture Day, but it was originally Emperor Meiji's birthday. And if that's too obscure, another way to find it is just to say her name, Mazie Hirono. And Hirono does sound a bit like Hirohito, but that's her family name. So her mother didn't choose it for her. But Mazie and Meiji sound enough alike that I was hoping people could guess it. But that was a little bit of a tough one, but there still is more than one route to the answer. And now I would like to ask you to try to do something similar in writing questions about Olympic host cities. Now, each of the cities that I hope, once again, let me just, is it visible? The list of cities?
Yep.
Okay. I'd like you to just choose one city. Don't say what it is yet, but just pick out one city that you think is interesting for a reason unrelated to the Olympics. And then think about why that city is interesting. Like, are there famous people from that city? Does it have a famous tourist attraction or landmark? What's the language spoken in that city? What cuisine might you find there? Just think of something interesting about one of those cities that's unrelated to the Olympics. And then I'll show you what I'd like you to do with it. Going back a little bit further than this list does, I could ask about the 1972 Winter Olympics and say, what city hosted the 1972 Winter Olympics? But that's kind of a dull question. And people who don't get it are just not, well.
I use that with my students all the time.
Oh, do you? Okay. Well, I mean, some people will know it. And why don't you tell us what it is?
Sapporo.
Yes. So some people know it's Sapporo. Some people don't know it's Sapporo, but that's all there is to that question. If you don't know it, you don't know it. But you could dress the question up a bit with an additional fact that provides an extra route to the answer by saying, just a moment, let me come back where you can see me, by saying, what city which hosted the 1972 Winter Olympics shares its name with a famous brand of Japanese beer? Then, sports lovers will get it for one reason and beer lovers will get it for another. And for people who are both, that question will be a walk in the park. But there's more than one route to the answer. And it just makes the questions interesting and more fun if you can include knowledge from two different areas. In this case, sports and beer. So I am going to give you up to 2 minutes to think about these. Let me put the list up there again. Think about this list of cities. Just choose one city and give me a question in which you reveal a fact other than the Olympics in the question itself. And then when you're done, you can either put it in the chat or raise your hand.
My question is so lame.
Oh, let's hear it anyway.
So do we write it in the chats, Tom?
You can write it in the chat if you're feeling shy, but otherwise it would be better to just read it out loud.
Oh,
I see. Okay. All right. I see James Crocker, Susan Kabata. Oh, actually, I didn't have my chat window.
for some
There's a
reason,
bunch
I'm
of them.
getting a
Okay, well, David Gilby asks, which city that hosted the 2000 Olympics has an opera house that looks like a rack of shells? Regina
Sydney!
asks, exactly, yeah, okay, you just shout it out. Regina asks, what is the name of the city that hosted the 1972 Winter Olympics? It also hosts a famous, Summer Olympics, Gomennasai. Summer Olympics also hosts a famous beer festival.
Sapporo.
Summer Olympics. So that was Munich?
Yes.
Yeah.
Munich, right.
Okay.
Right.
Suzanne Kamata asks, in what city which hosted the Winter Olympics is alcohol not served?
Salt Lake City.
Interesting. That's a very good question. James Crocker, in which city with a famous opera house shaped like a ship's sails hosted 2000? That's Sydney again.
Read it.
Sarah Fujimura, what Japanese city known for its bathing snow monkeys hosted the Winter Olympics in 1998?
Nagano.
Nagano.
Yep. And finally, Sue Brennan, what city hosted the 1992 Summer Olympics that has a famous landmark that has been under construction for the past century?
Barcelona.
Barcelona.
Yeah, I like that. Because you've got to think about it for a moment to get the under construction part. What calming city hosted? Okay, yeah, I wasn't. And then Tracy's question: what calming city hosted this frozen over Winter Olympics?
Lillehammer?
Lake Placid.
Oh, Lake Placid.
Yeah. There are many ways to write good trivia questions, and puns are certainly a big part of that. I because I've only got a limited amount of time, I wasn't going to get into puns today, but puns are an excellent way to approach it. So thank you very much for that, Tracy.
Tom, I've got one.
Yeah.
Known for a dish of cheese curds, French fries, and gravy, this city is the only Summer Olympic host city to not win a single gold medal.
Was that Toronto?
That was
Vancouver.
that was Montreal, Tom. Toronto's
Montreal. Oh, there was no Toronto. Montreal. Okay. The poutine question.
Yes.
Okay. Well, what would you rather have, really? A gold medal or poutine?
Poutine.
Yeah, I mean, that's the good stuff. Okay. Moving along, you've got to keep things well paced. You want your quiz to keep moving. One way to do that is to form your questions as lists of 3 items, short lists of 3 things. And if you have a whole round of questions where it follows the very same pattern on the same general topic, you can shoot through a bunch of questions very quickly. So for example, in what country will you find the cities of Paris, Lyon, and Nice? Anybody?
France.
France, yeah. Or in what country will you find the cities of Venice, Florence, and Rome?
Italy.
Italy, yeah. So I mean, those things go very quickly, and you can just shoot through a bunch of questions very fast to keep up the energy of the event. And cities and countries are a very obvious way to do that pattern, but it can fit almost any topic once you start to think about it. So you could have, for example, 3 athletes, name the team that they are on, 3 musicians, name the band that they are in, 3 battles, name the war, 3 books, name the author, 3 films, name the director. You can just go on and on and on and just come up with a whole bunch of sets of 3 all on the same theme. And you can go through a lot of questions very quickly. Another way to make things quick and also easy for your players is to use multiple choice. Now notice that I didn't say multiple choice, because multiple choice actually slows things down. If you want to ask multiple choice questions, you've got to read the whole question and then you've got to read 4 different answers. But with multiple choice, you hand out a set of answers at the beginning, and then all of your questions have answers within that set. This is something I stumbled on about 2 years ago while doing, about 2 years ago while doing a round about the Old Testament. I wanted people to name characters from the Old Testament, and I figured that these stories are either going to be very familiar or at least vaguely recalled by a lot of people in the crowd, but the names of these biblical characters who lived 3,000 years ago might not be at the tip of their tongue. So I just made little slips of paper with 15 names on them that were either biblical or biblical sounding names and handed those out. And I said, I'm going to ask 10 questions about 10 people on this list. You have to tell me which person it is. And that way I just had to ask the question describing the character, and then people could look at their list to see the answer. Now, handing things out is a little bit of a complication, but you can just tell people a group of things that they already know. One of the shows that I did on Jeopardy had a category like this called the 7 continents. So every answer was the name of one of the 7 continents. So if you give people a small, very finite category of things that they can probably name a couple of right off the top of their head. Like earlier, we had a question about planets. There's only 9 of those. If you did a category of planets, everyone's got a 1 in 9 chance of guessing it right off the bat. Or I guess there are 8 now. I always forget that Pluto was demoted. any small group of familiar things can serve as a multiple choice group of answers. For example, the G7 countries could be a set of multiple choice answers, or the films of Steven Spielberg, or pizza toppings, Marvel superheroes, British monarchs, the novels of Charles Dickens, fast food chains, anything that there's only a small number of them and people know a few. If you make that your answer bank, then you can just get through the questions very quickly. And even people who aren't so sure about a particular question at least have a limited range of things to guess from. And that will keep your event moving along. Number 9, as for getting back to how to write questions, the actual structure of a single question, if there's an element in your question that is either a giveaway or the biggest clue, put it at the end like a punchline. I already did this once with the Nabia Yusuf question. I started out with, Nabia Yusuf is the last person on the list, which is, so obscure, no one's going to know it. But then at the end came the 1912 maritime disaster, which people can guess. So the ending comes as kind of a relief. And if I was doing my 3 cities category after asking those questions about France and Italy, I might ask a question like this. In what country will you find the cities of Paris, Rome, and Seattle? Anyway,
America.
The United States.
The United, States.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, it's Paris, Texas, Rome, New York, and Seattle, Washington. But it starts out a little tricky because Paris, you immediately think France, and then Rome, wait a minute, what's going on here? But then Seattle, there's only one Seattle, as far as I am aware. So that last bit gives it away. So if you save the easiest part, the giveaway clue, for the very end, like a punchline, you'll have your listeners starting out feeling confused, and then suddenly they get it and they feel good about themselves, which is something you want, because the quiz is supposed to be a fun event. And with that in mind, we come to point number 10, final point of the evening or afternoon, wherever you may be. That's about the order of questions. They generally come in themed categories, and you'd ask 8 or 10 questions about a particular category before moving on to the next set. But within each category, you should arrange it so that the first question is an easy one. This is just traditional in pub quizzes to get everyone started in a good mood. So, yay, we got it. We've got 1 point already. We're doing great. And it also is how TV quiz shows, things like Jeopardy, the easy questions are at the top and they get harder as they go down. On Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, the ridiculously easy questions at the beginning, and then they get more challenging as you go along. But with a pub quiz, which is supposed to be, remember, a fun social event, the last question should also be an easy one. Put your hard questions in somewhere around the middle, but make your first question and your last question easy. The first, just to get everyone off to a good start, but the last, because, as I said earlier, a pub quiz is generally played by a team of people sitting around a table, and they're conferring with each other, chatting about what the answer might possibly be, which makes it a social event. But the last question is the one they have the least time to discuss. So you don't want to make that the hardest question. Make that a fairly easy one so that the teams can quickly come to an agreement on what their answer is going to be, and then hand in their answer sheets feeling good about it. Okay, now with all of that said, I think I have used up exactly 40 minutes of the presentation time. So that leaves us with exactly 10 minutes for Q&A. But before we do that, I'll put up my 10 tips on the screen. If you want to take a screenshot of it, go ahead. And there it is. So that wraps everything up. And now, if you have any questions, ask me. Chat. Okay. I thought if you have it, you can put questions in chat. I'd rather hear them. But anyway, Jean, hello. Nice to see you too. I just saw your note in the chat.
Tom.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, is there a difference between designing a questions for a pub trivia and designing questions for a trivia night that might well be a fundraiser?
Well, my short answer would be no. Other people might give you different answers, but the ones that I have participated in Tokyo actually have been fundraisers. They're all generally, they're charity events where you pay 1,000 yen to join, and then the money in the pot plus however more people might want to donate goes to the charity. So in either case, if it's a fundraiser though, the having a good time is still of paramount importance. Because there is no valuable prize at stake. Some of the pub quizzes I've been to, even the charity ones, they do have little token prizes that they'll give out, like you know, a team that's doing well might get a plate of sausage rolls, or the winning team might get a bottle of wine. But overall, it's just about having a good time, and so there's no need to make the questions too hard if it's that kind of event.
No, what made me think of it was that, I mean, the couple of times I've been to trivia nights recently, there have been those kinds of events, and the two other things that have punctuated the actual questions are, one is at the beginning a sheet of questions about the field of endeavor that, say, the group of people or the charity might be focused on becomes a kind of a list of questions that has to. And the other thing is, sometimes I've been to a couple of art gallery trivia nights. They've had an art project which the group has to kind of draw, manufacture out of, you know, Play-Doh or something like that, you know, during the course of the evening. So there's an activity that goes with the questions.
Yeah, I have been to a quiz like that at least once in Tokyo. It was by Amnesty International. And they had a round of quizzes about some of the issues that group is involved in. But the ones that I usually, there are two quizzes pub quizzes at which I am a regular. One in non-pandemic times is held at the Footnick Bar in Ebisu, and that is currently in support of a British breast cancer charity. And the other is usually held at the Hobgoblin in Shibuya, and that is in support of TEL, which is based here in Japan. It's an English language mental health counseling service, and they run a suicide hotline, among other things. So those are both worthy causes, but since it's the same cause every month and people are generally familiar with the cause, those don't really lend themselves to questions. I mean, you wouldn't want to have 10 questions about breast cancer at every single event, or 10 questions about mental health. But with something like an art museum, sure. Yes, James S, I should say.
Can you address, like, for example, I find Jeopardy to be a bit difficult for myself because it's a little bit America-centric.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Can you address that, please?
Yes.
Yeah, that is true. Especially here in Tokyo, in this international community we've got, you don't want your questions to lean too far into the sports or pop culture or politics of any one particular country, because your crowd may be made of people from Japan, Canada, the United States, Australia, Singapore, and who knows where else. But that can be a strength of the event too, though, or at least it can be the strength of teams, because different people know. I'm going to digress a bit. This is not about writing quizzes, but when you're putting together a pub quiz team, you want to have a diverse group. If you can have people from different nationalities, that's great. People from different generations is more significant than what you might imagine. But just as you want those different views on your team, you don't want to be asking questions that are narrowly focused on people with one particular kind of background. So, if you're going to ask about, say, pop music, don't make it all American pop music. Try to include a couple of examples from Australia or Britain or somewhere else. Anyway, so yes, James, in Tokyo, that is an especially important point. Like if you were at a pub quiz in London, you could ask things that only Londoners would know and everybody would love it. But
okay, thank you, Tom.
All right, anybody else?
Have you had any of your questions highly and publicly and contentiously disputed?
Ha ha ha! Yes, yes, I have. I don't know if you can see all of the little windows here, but most people have their name at the bottom of the window. There's one window where the name just says "boo," and that's, yes, that is my my uncheering section. All the Rotten Tomatoes come from James. Sorry, not James Crocker. We've got two Jameses here. I don't want to defame the wrong James. I'll defame James Solier. He complains a lot, and sometimes his complaints are legitimate. I once asked a question about the white ship disaster of 1120, which I think is a fascinating story, and I urge you all to look it up, but no one had heard of it, and that was just way too obscure. I knew that was going to be a tough question, so I tried to have the category was about famous ships. So I tried to precede it by what I thought was an easy question about the black ships, which are a famous thing in Japanese history. And I thought everyone's going to get the black ships question, and then won't it be funny if ha ha ha, I ask about the white ship after that. Nobody knew either of those questions. They were just too obscure. And James let me know, but James loves to complain, which is fine. He's good at it. So, but
So
anyway.
How do you handle hecklers or people complaining?
Well, you have to go back to a line I used earlier, which is that the quizmaster is always right. And say that, don't wait for an argument to come up before you say that. Say that right at the beginning of the evening to set the ground rules. You know, in the event of a dispute, the quizmaster is always right. But if you do a couple of the things that I've suggested here, particularly including a source, that's a way to try to avoid heckling heckling is going to happen no matter what, but it's disputes. And I guess for heckling that's not factually based and people just trying to cause trouble, I guess really the main thing you need for that is a thick skin.
And the heckling isn't all good fun, really.
In my experience, it has all been in good fun, but I can imagine there might be less fun. And then you might need the thick skin and the services of a tough bouncer. The pubs I've gone to don't need bouncers, but I'm sure there are places like that out there.
Actually, that's a really interesting area of thinking about quizzes. In Australia at the moment, one of the very popular quizzes on television occurs on the ABC, and it's called Hard Quiz. Hard Quiz.
Yeah.
And I think James Crocker will agree with me. And it revels in the quizmaster insulting the participants. And it's become very popular because it has its own particular format and pleasures. And I must say, that's the only quiz show that I watch on television. It has a kind of an entertainment value that's not psychologically belittling, but is actually part of the comedy of the quiz show and extends the meaning of a quiz show just into other areas. It's a hybrid thing, I think.
Yeah. All right. Well, I suppose that's fine as long as everyone is in on the joke. I mean, you don't want to get into bullying or belittling people, but if it's understood to be comedy and people are willingly involved, then
yes,
I suppose that's all right.
Yeah, people sign up for it.
Yeah, Jeopardy, the show that I was on, is kind of famously good-natured. It's meant to be the host. Alex Trebek was a very gentle person, and I think most of his potential successors, they haven't chosen a permanent one yet, are trying to be that way. There's a quiz I often watch online called University Challenge, which is a British quiz, which is quite a bit tougher than Jeopardy. And the host there, Jeremy Paxman, sometimes scolds people for not knowing the answers, but he does it very gently. It's mild scolding, and it's delivered in a somewhat joking tone.
Well, this brings me to a point that it sounds like these quizzes can be used not only as classroom adjuncts, but maybe even poetry readings as well. Anything to enlarge or entertain the event or the class.
Oh yeah, well, it's all about, well, in poetry readings often take place in pubs also. I mean, and it's all about just gathering a bunch of people together and have some fun with the language and throw down a few drinks while you're at it.
Have you seen the jeopardylabs.com, Tom, the website where you can create your own Jeopardy squares? It's for online Jeopardy. I don't know if you use those.
I have not. I know
I've
of a
used them in
couple
my
of related
classes.
websites, but that's a new one to me.
Yeah, you can do it. You can do a certain amount of it free, and then if you subscribe, you can get even bigger squares. But it's great for when you're trying to prepare students for a test and you want a fun activity to remind them of the information they're supposed to know. You can set up a Jeopardy quiz with your own, information about whatever it is you've been teaching them. So it's a fun website to use. And there's tons, because it's been crowdsourced. If you click on, if you search for like Christmas quizzes, you'll find like 5,000 quizzes out there that you can just use for free online. You don't even have to make your own. So.
And that is called Jeopardy Labs, you said?
Yeah, jeopardylabs.com.
Ah, okay. There's another website that might be interesting to look at if you need models for how to write questions, called the J Archive, and that's J with an exclamation mark after it. And that's also crowdsourced. A bunch of Jeopardy fans, but Jeopardy allows them to do it because they've been at it for years. They write down every single question that has appeared on the show, and there's tens of thousands of questions on that website now.
Yeah, if you go to the Jeopardy Labs and you look for some quizzes on Dr. Seuss, I've got a couple on there.
Yeah, but it's definitely got a good. Quizzes definitely have an educational aspect. I mean, it helps be educated going into them, but it reinforces what you know, and you can also learn new things from that you didn't previously know, like who Nabia Youssef is, or that King William IV of Prussia had an animal collection.
And for Japanese students, like if you wanted to quiz them on something like Christmas customs in America, there's a lot of questions that might be really difficult for them that would be really easy for natives. So it's another way to just sort of get them thinking of and in English and speaking in English without like having to come up with super brilliant questions.
Yeah, and the Christmas customs also brings to mind a whole other aspect of quizzes I didn't have time to get into today, which is visuals. Christmas customs, you could have all sorts of visual aids for questions in a category like that.
Tom, do you have to get people to leave their phones at the door these days so they're not?
Well, that's as I said before. The quizzes I'm in have all been. The pub quizzes I've been in have been charity fundraisers. And so that's another thing. In addition to the quizmaster is always right, we tell people no looking at your phones. There might be an intermission in the middle where people can look at their phones, but not during the quiz. And some people just can't seem to stop doing it, which is very annoying. And if it was a serious competition for serious prizes, that would be terrible. But if it's just a fun quiz for charity, it's bad enough. It's pathetic. Why cheat on a fun quiz? Why cheat on any quiz? But particularly if it's all just for a good time and raising money for a good cause. But you do have to tell people, often more than once, not to use their phones during the quiz. And people will come up with all types of justifications. Oh, I'm just checking an email. Well, it doesn't look like you're checking an email to all the other players and they don't like it. So check your email after the quiz or go outside. Check your email in the ladies' room or the men's room.
A couple of quizzes I've been to, they've actually required people to put their phones in a plastic basket in the middle of the table so that they can see that their phone is okay, but nobody can use their phones.
Yeah. That actually sounds like a good solution. And that way, if the earthquake alarm goes off, you'll still hear it, but no one's going to be getting any unfair advantage. All right, well, we're over time now. But any questions or Sue, are you going to kick us out?
Yeah, sorry, I think I'm going to kick you out.
Okay.
I just got the nudge. I didn't realize it was my call.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. That was fun.